So Felidae?
I think that's how they were saying it.
Felidae. I think so.
Felidae.
There's a theme song, yeah. We have a song in this case to tell us how to pronounce the title.
Oh my God, the song.
Boy George
the Boy
song.
George.
We're going to use the Boy George pronunciation. I was walking around for like a half hour singing this song to myself.
This song?
It's an earworm. Felidae.
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 This song does not stick in my head.
Oh man, it's in my head.
I don't know that folk music suits Boy George. I'm not totally sure.
Felidae.
You know what also is a banger? I don't feel no pain no more.
Is that a Boy George?
No, that's the Plague Dog song.
Oh, yeah.
And it turns into like a gospel song if you stick around in the credits.
Yeah.
Before that, it's like this a cappella thing. And then all of a sudden they're like, we're going to the other side.
Like, to the island.
Swimming out to the Isle of Dogs.
There is no island. Well, we'll get to that. Boy.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Well, should we, you gonna intro?
All right, so the way we start these is we got to sync up our audio for later. So I'm going to just count us off like a rock band. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're all going to clap.
Oh, you know what I thought, Tony? Since I heard them do that on the Conan's podcast, I think it's more intuitive if you count down. So we're like 3, 2, 1, clap.
You want to do 3? We can do 3.
I feel like we've done that. We've done it so many different ways, and it's always been mixed results.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna have one less beat now to get the tempo, so everybody better pay fucking attention.
This is Conan.
3, 2, 1, clap. That'll be the thing.
Yeah.
So let's give it a try. 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to Unwatchables, the podcast home for wayward films where we decide if they're fit to be released into society. I am Marc Dottavio.
I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we're discussing 2 films that prove neither animation nor talking animals are just for children, or even squeamish adults. Those films are Martin Rosen's 1982 adaptation of Richard Adams' The Plague Dogs, and Michael Schaack's 1994 grisly feline murder mystery, Felidae.
Meow.
Meow.
Bark, bark.
All right, Seth, you want to introduce our very special guest for this episode?
Yeah, this is Aaron Reese we have in the house here. In my opinion, at least, a little bit of a animation fanatic and little know-it-all. I feel like you every time I'm like posting anything about animation online, Aaron's got like a bunch of facts about it that I didn't know, and I always appreciate it. I know you go to like conventions and you meet a lot of creators and voice actors and things like that. And I can see in the background, if you're watching the YouTube link, that there is like quite a collection. You're quite a collector. So I knew
quite a lot of junk.
On our first animation episode, we should get Aaron. So yeah, welcome, Aaron. I'm glad to see you.
Thank you. I mean, I did teach an after-school program on animation for about 6 years. I did a thesis on animation in front of a board of historians. One of the people of which was the son of an animator from Snow White. His dad was an in-betweener for Dopey. So
wow.
I've been into animation history a long time, and I've known Seth a long time too.
That's cool.
Yeah, when I told my parents I was doing this episode with you guys, my mom had to say, "Oh, I had little Seth Troyer in 3rd grade." And then my dad, he said, "I never had Seth, but any friend of Robin Geiler's is a friend of mine."
Robin Geiler's my roommate and was just on the John Waters episode. And say hi to your mom for me. And I don't mean that
I will.
In some sort of silly joke way. Your mom was a good 3rd grade teacher, I gotta say.
Oh, well, I will let her know. You said that.
Yes. Yeah, happy to have you on the podcast to talk about the weird outliers of animated history. I think it's safe to say. Both of these movies I'm very interested in having on the podcast, and they aren't necessarily the obvious choices for like Unwatchables, but to me they're like they're an interesting gray area where there are the Fritz the Cats. There's like today there's Adult Swim where it's just like X-rated, wild, off the chain, like tits and ass and death and feces everywhere. And
Man,
then
your
there's
third
like the
grade
other.
teacher is shaking her head right now.
I know.
Oh, don't
I'm
worry.
sorry,
She's
Mrs.
not listening.
Reese.
Okay.
She's not
Okay,
listening. I
okay,
can tell
okay.
you right now. Now, my dad probably is.
Well, I'll take that.
Let's
But-
just
and then
remember
on
this is
the-
a podcast primarily for children.
Yes. And speaking of children, the other side of animation seems to always be Disney G-rated films. And there was a time, it seems, and there's still, are every once in a while outliers, but it seems like during this like sort of 80s, Ralph Bakshi was part of it as well, that there was like this rise in, or attempted rise in these films that are sort of like PG-13, like intense themes, more adult content, but not necessarily like just doing it for the sake of being like gross, like an R. Crumb thing. And again, like definitely like both of these movies are not for kids at all. It is like just there's serious attempts at just animated features. And they just don't fit in those boxes really that we're used to seeing with animation. And first off
This
is
isn't
the Play
the-
Dogs.
Yeah, and I think that I'm really glad that we have Aaron on here and somebody who is kind of specializes in animation because,
Thank you.
I've seen plenty of animated films, but I'm not sure I totally have the vocabulary to talk about them. And for these ones especially, like Seth said, nowadays, at least in the mainstream, if you're going to the theater to see an animated film, it's going to be a family film. And, any movie buff is going to be familiar with animated films that, are not solely in the realm of, children's entertainment. But, these particular ones do all feature talking animals, and that's definitely a staple of, children's fiction. So on one hand, we have the animation aspect, and on the other hand, we have these kind of anthropomorphized animals that is something that you often don't see an adult story being told through. And, these movies are not, jokey about that at all. So I was definitely interested to go into these, and I think it goes into unwatchable territory because, these do deal with some very adult themes, and there's some really brutal things that happen in these movies. And in that sense, thank God they're animated.
Oh my
For
god.
sure.
Plague Dog's non-animated version of Thank You.
No. That's something I don't want to see.
No. I already have enough questions when I watch like The Incredible Journey and things like that. Where I'm like,
Oh,
how
well,
many
you
animals
said-
died during this?
You said in your last podcast you guys watched Milo and Otis. I mean, props to you. You got to have like a stomach of steel to watch that, knowing what went on in that picture.
It's like, oh yeah, they were fine by the end of the movie, I'm sure. So
Yeah. Little known fact
Cannibal
in Marley and
Holocaust
Me.
also.
Oh God, yeah. But no, in Marley and Me, they actually killed about 10 dogs for
Jesus.
the death in that. So no, just kidding.
just to get
Oh,
a good
shit.
death. They just won't die right.
There's just no other way to convincingly do it. So, and they needed a lot
my
of takes.
God.
So, all right,
Yeah,
but
if
yeah.
you are a person that goes to before you see a movie and you go to the website, Does the Dog Die? These movies are not for you.
Yeah.
I can just tell you, just straight out, just save your time. But if you're someone who appreciates serious animation, and I'm not talking like as Seth said, not gross out. Ralph Bakshi draws a dick, and it's funny because oh my god, it's a penis in a in animation. It's a cartoon.
Yeah.
It's not like that at all. If you're into something serious, and it's an animated drawing, it's an animated picture, then check this out. I think before we start, we should probably establish that this is the follow-up to Watership Down. I feel like that's a movie a lot of people are familiar with, is Watership Down.
Yeah, we
And
were
it's
definitely
based
wanting
on-
to touch on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
just watched that for the first time for this episode so that I could be familiar with it.
Yeah, I read that. I might have been in your mom's class, Aaron. The book Watership Down, and it is
Oh, really?
it's intense. It is like a 400-page book about rabbits and the intent, like an intense fantasy lore. There's like all these like languages that the rabbits have. This is sort of Richard Adams' thing, is like not again like this weird in between zone where it's like it's not a cute little story about rabbits. It's not like a adult fantasy story. It's still about rabbits. It's again falls into this like strange in between zone, but is very much introduces something that comes into play in Plague's Dogs in a much bigger way, is this immense respect and reverence for nature, I think, with these like stories of an epic quest that is led by a rabbit who can see visions, named Fiver, and they have to like they're escaping the great danger and stuff like that. But there's the movie adaptation, which is it Marc Rosen is the director of Watership Down and Plague Dogs? Martin Rosen. It establishes a very like no holds barred, like 1 minute there's a cutesy scene happening, and the next minute there is a battle between various rabbits, and there is blood, and they scratch each other's eyes and rip their ears and things like that. There's talk of mating. There's all sorts of bodily functions happening and things, which carries over. Yeah, it's a Watership Down. Definitely, it must have been, jarring at the time to see, for sure, for audiences.
And just to be clear,
Definitely.
so Richard Adams wrote Watership Down and The Plague Dogs.
And the Plague Dogs.
And both of the films were made into movies by Martin Rosen, who actually, those are his only 2 directing credits as far as feature-length films. I believe he was more of a producer, kind of a theater director guy. And he just got into the Richard Adams adaptation business, which actually kind of made me think about how for a while, Frank Darabont, the director, made the Shawshank Redemption, finally made another movie, which was The Green Mile. And for a long time, he was like, oh, this is just the guy who adapts Stephen King prison movies.
Just the prison ones.
Yeah. And he did then do The Mist, which took him out of the prison setting, but was still a Stephen King adaptation. But so basically, Martin Rosen is linked with Richard Adams, and it started with Watership Down. The film came out in 1978, but the book was written in 1972. And I do want to talk a little bit about Richard Adams, the author, because he's known for this way that he anthropomorphizes animals, but in kind of a more naturalistic and thoughtful way. It's not at all a cute or cartoony kind of thing. The animals, even though they are able to speak English, they do evoke how actual animals might think or act. And a lot of his books I wasn't aware of follow through on that. He has another book called Shardik that's about a giant bear. There's one called The Ship's Cat about this Elizabethan ship's cat. That's a narrative poem for children. There's another one called Traveler, which is basically looking at the Civil War through the point of view of Robert E. Lee's favorite horse. So like this is definitely his thing. And he was at one point even president of the RSPCA, the Royal Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. So, in that sense, he is kind of an environmentalist and an advocate for animals and against fur. But his books don't read to me, and I've only read The Plague Dogs, as tracts or environmentalist, lectures or anything. They're very complex. There's allegory in them. And they have really suspenseful, riveting, surface level adventures that are going on. But beyond that, in his writing, there's so much dark humor and irony. And like Seth was saying, mythology, as far as Watership Down goes, he likes to play with language and different dialects.
Yeah, like Tolkien or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would compare it to, I haven't read his books. I've only seen the two movies. But what I would compare that to is something like Redwall, possibly, where it's not quite totally for kids, but not quite adult either. There's still a lot of complexity there. Possibly even Kenneth Grahame too. There's a bit of a Wind of the Willows kind of feel. The way like the different there's different animals and the way they just interact with each other, the way different types of humans do. That's an idea that's like definitely explored in both of these stories. And by both, I mean Watership Down and, of course, the Plague Dogs.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of thing that I think gets forgotten about, like fantasy involving anthropomorphic animals. Again, I would compare him to Tolkien in the way that it seems like these things start out as like little children's stories or something, like where they're like, oh, there's a rabbit and he's on an adventure, and then like the kid goes to sleep and the guy is left there and he's still just like, and now I'm gonna pen the history and the mythology and the glossary, and the kids are like, what are you talking about, Dad? Like, and then I'm going to have the dogs, go on this horrifying adventure, and it's going to have all kinds of economic and environmental like underpinnings and things like that. It's just like no, like very much the thing with both of these movies is like no one asked for it, but here it is, and I love that about a lot of art. Yeah, that's some of my favorite art is like that. So yeah, I guess we should dive into the tank full of poison gas and water that is Plague Dogs.
Yeah, and I'll do just a quick little summary here. And I think that a big difference between Plague Dogs and Watership Down, at least from what I can tell, and this maybe is a little more pronounced in the book than in the film, is that Watership Down is all animal characters. So it's basically an allegory, from what I understand, that mainly is just about the animals interacting with themselves, where the Plague Dogs is very much a relationship with animals and our power and responsibility towards them. And again, the human characters are much more significant in the book, but we'll talk about how that's handled specifically in this movie. But it does start out in this animal testing facility. It's basically where they run these cruel experiments on animals that, at least in the foreword to the book, Richard Adams says are all based on actual experiments that had been done on animals, although there probably wasn't one place that did all of them on all different kinds of animals like this. But he did take inspiration from real life for that. The
facility is referred to as ARSE, ARSE or something.
Yep. That's a little bit of his
humor
there.
Very clever.
Yeah.
But of course I laugh, but the opening shot is, if I'm not mistaken, a dog being drowned because of a experiment, basically, like struggling underwater as like scientists watch.
Yeah, it's so basically intense. To see how long he can last, and they do it over and over again to see if he can last longer each time. So I think the opening scene of this movie really prepares you for the pretty grim tone going in, because it's very evocative. You get these opening credits that are over these sounds of struggling and drowning, and we see that that's one of our two main characters, Ralph, who's a Labrador mix, who's being tortured in this experiment. And just to give a real, we can go scene by scene here, but just so everyone gets an idea of exactly what the surface level plot summary is here. Ralph and another dog, a fox terrier named Snitter, are in this animal testing facility. They're able to escape one night, and most of the movie is them traversing the countryside with hunters trying to catch them. And eventually a journalist starts a rumor that they might be carrying the bubonic plague, because that has been studied in the laboratory where they escaped from. And that leads to all kinds of irony, where it actually ends up protecting the dogs to some extent. And the dogs think that, maybe Snitter has powers that are keeping the people from harming them, but really they're just afraid because they think they might have plague. But on the other hand, that ends up, they end up getting the government officials involved. The military is called in to hunt them down, and it's basically them trying to escape and survive without, having any owners or purpose, and trying to live as wild animals. But yeah, just to go back to the beginning, I think this opening sequence is, with them escaping and going through this lab of horrors where we see rabbits and rats all in these contraptions, and this horrible image of this monkey in an isolation chamber that it returns throughout the film.
We also realize
this
early
opening,
on that... Oh yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
This is the reason. Years and years ago, I started watching this movie, and this opening was the reason I stopped. I had to come back to it later because this movie, right out the bat, it doesn't make the mistake Watership Down did before it. Where Watership Down opens in this very surreal type of fantasy sequence, and it kind of looks like it could be a children's movie. This movie makes the correction, saying, like, this is what you're going to get. Like, this is what the movie is.
Yeah.
Animal torture is the theme here, just right out the bat.
Yeah, I can only imagine 1982, a bunch of like families walking out already. Like at this point, it's like, because the poster, it looks like it's there's just two dogs running, and there's like a helicopter chasing them. It just looks like a classic, like,
it looks like North by Northwest, but with dogs is what the poster looks like.
Which it is not. Yeah, this one, it is one of the things that really strikes me about it is like its intense thematic pacing and tone that just is. It just starts at the beginning and goes till the end. It really does not waver for me. I think it's very consistent, and with its dread and intensity.
It's very compact.
And yeah, we learn early on in the lab, another disturbing thing we can see visually is that there's something wrong with, is it Stitter?
Snitter.
Yeah. Played by John Hurt.
John Hurt.
Does
wonderful job.
Amazing job as Stitter, Snitter. But he has a lobotomy of some sort. He has like a metal thing on his head, or just like, he's been like experimented on, and he's like twitchy and similar to Watership Down, which I find interesting. Like, he is a character who is seen as sort of like has one paw in the realm of mysticism because he has these quote unquote visions, which we as audience members are left to ponder as like whether or not they are like actual mystical visions, or just because like he's been experimented on and like is, having psychosis or something, which is really intense. But he's like very earnest and very determined. Whereas like Ralph, they have an interesting dynamic that I love through this movie. Ralph is more pessimistic. Ralph is like almost the whole movie is just Ralph like sort of indulging him. Ralph was kind of ready to just stay and die in the lab.
Ralph was ready to die many times in this movie if Snitter was not there.
Which I think is very interesting.
And early on, while they're still in this lab before they get out, we get this pretty eerie flashback to Snitter's past, because he did used to have a master, unlike Ralph, and was involved in this horrible accident where he ran out into the road and his master tried to follow him and gets hit and killed by a car. So if all of this wasn't despairing enough, he has these memories of once being happy with this master and then blaming himself for causing his death. And then him eventually ending up being sold to this lab for experimentation. And this is all the first like 15 minutes of the movie. And, the way that the animation looks too is very moody. There's all these shadows and canted angles as they're going through the lab. And I wonder maybe
backgrounds.
Yes. Yeah. Really, really beautiful, like watercolor backgrounds, I believe, throughout this whole movie.
A lot of water. I would say a lot of it looks like it was done with colored pencils too. I'm not positive about that, but it looks like colored pencils. And
Yeah.
something I noticed close to the end of the movie, I noticed there's an interesting dynamic between the characters and the backgrounds themselves. Something looked a little off, and it wasn't until near the end of the movie did I realize the characters aren't outlined in black the way most animation characters on cells are. There's usually like that black outline to distinctify like the character from the background, and this one doesn't do that. There's no outline, and they blend into the background so well. There are so many shots throughout this film where if you just took like a picture of the shot, it would look like almost like a painting. It's a very distinct style that's really like the closest thing I've seen is Watership Down. Like the two styles are very similar, but this is something that you just could not reproduce in Flash. You couldn't reproduce this in CG. It is very unique to the hand-drawn format.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that is something that's just even a layman can probably see here is just how striking the visuals in the foreground can blend into the background, which the classic thing is always like Scooby-Doo, you know, like the, you know, Shaggy walking in front of the background. He's just so like not, he is very clearly like the moving object, and the rest is just like a totally different style. This seems so uniform. Even Watership Down seems less sophisticated than the way the actual character design works on this. And maybe it's because there's only 2 characters rather than like dozens of characters. I think that also a lot of it.
Yeah, there's
and you mentioned his oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You mentioned his flashback, Snitter's flashback. Whenever he has one of those, and this is something that's this is something that works for a movie adaptation of a book. When he has the flashbacks, there's this very unique visual style where it looks almost like a negative of a photograph. It's almost black and white. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the differences between this and Watership Down, I think, is Watership Down does have a number of these sequences that get very impressionistic and abstract, you know, from that opening, you know, creation story and the different visions that Fiverr has. And I feel like there's less of that here. Like you did point out that there's the kind of negative, you know, looking colors in certain parts. And I know when they kind of make their little pact that they're going to become wild animals and live in the wild, that he has this kind of vision of like rocks turning into giant wolves.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was wonderful.
But it does seem like there's less of that overall in this. It's more, it is very moody and atmospheric and everything, but it doesn't quite use the possibilities as much for, you know, going really abstract with things, which is something I like in animation. And I think it's appropriate for this story, but that is something that stuck out to me because those were my favorite parts of the Watership Down film.
Yeah, I like that too. I mean, it was Ralph Bakshi who said he believes that every animated film should have more than one style of animation, and I personally have to agree with that. I like when they change it up, but the difference between Watership Down and Plague Dogs, again, or I guess another difference, is that Plague Dogs makes it very clear that this is not as fantasaical as Watership Down. We are clearly in reality. We're in a very stark, dreary reality compared to what we saw in Watership, where there's a bit more of a fantasaical aspect going on.
But I wouldn't downplay that moment, though, of wild psychedelia that happens when they do finally escape. It works so well, and in a way that only animation
There's still
can
enough
do,
up in the air.
because that moment is really exciting because it is like so dreary the first part of the movie, and then when they get out, it is this very it's an exciting other thread that's going on with the movie that is kind of it's an abstract kind of theme going on that is the animals being free again and becoming animals again is sort of this thing that they're they're now like wandering the highlands on their own, and they come across this like Stonehenge sort of place. It's really weird. And is that where they kill for the first time?
They kill the sheep.
Yeah, they kill a sheep.
believe,
So
yeah.
so these animals that have been like, they had masters and they were, domesticated. Now they are going back to a more, natural, however you want to look to it, kind of response to life. And it's kind of this mystical crossing of the threshold that is pretty badass to watch, and also kind of tragic again, as they're going back to becoming these like predators. It's good and bad. It's confusing. Yeah.
And those few
Snitters-
fantastical moments do stand out
Yeah.
more in this context because it's so much more grounded.
Mhm.
And I really feel like that is in general what's missing from like badly in modern animation, at least the kind that you would go out and see in the mainstream, is they so much just want to go for this crisp realism, where you just want to make sure that you can see every hair on their head and every blade of grass, and there's so little actual style in it. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we lost with two-dimensional and hand-drawn animation basically going away for the most part. And it's, even something like Into the Spider-Verse that people were kind of losing their shit over, I was expecting something a little more stylized than we ended up actually getting. They were still these kind of like rubbery looking CGI guys running around. And it's just so refreshing to see something with the craft and, distinctiveness that goes into this movie.
No, nothing can compare. It's abstract, and like you said, Snitter's visions are so ambiguous that maybe it's real, maybe it isn't, but so much of the movie looks realistic in the way that only a 2D movie can. Isn't like you can do in CGI, where you can see like every blade of grass, or you can see every poof of dust. And I mean, if you watch behind the scenes features of a modern animated film, you'll see how much focus that goes into. Like, I remember watching a documentary on the day in the life of John Lasseter, and he always has his little his iPad with him, and he's looking over every frame of the movie Cars, and he's like, "Oh, there's not enough dust on the wheel there. We got to add some more there. We got to add some more dirt right there." It's like, kids aren't going to see that. Like, the kids that this movie is for don't care. It's impressive, don't get me wrong, but looking at older films like this, that wasn't the focus. It was always how can we take a drawing and make a drawing move? And you can't. There are shortcuts that have to be made. That's why when you study the look of a cartoon character and see how they make the move, it's all shortcuts. Look at something from Hanna-Barbera. Like, study the face of like Yogi or Huckleberry Hound or something. It makes no sense. It's all abstract, and it's these abstractions that are moving, that fool our eye. And we don't it's like a magic trick, and we don't really have the same type of magic trick anymore. It's how realistic can we possibly get? How much can we push this hardware? It's not quite the same. And this particular movie does its own thing. It's a very unique look in of itself.
And it's so much more evocative when it's requiring, your mind to engage in it. It creates this, it's a lot like reading in a way where, you're just looking at words on a page, but you do it long enough and it starts to actively involve your mind in it. And you start to connect with things more on an instinctual level of emotion than you would, where, when something is just photorealistic, it doesn't leave you any room to do anything like that. And that's like the magic of animation to me. Like, that's the whole point of it, is that it's not real, but it creates its own reality that your mind adjusts to.
Sure.
And I do want to talk about just how the animals do look in this, because, they're not made to have human features or anything. But they're always like grooming and, panting and scratching and licking each other. Like
They
all their
pee.
movements are like pitch perfect. And I think they got that in Watership Down too. It's like if you have a cat even, or a dog, like, you recognize how they'll be talking and scratching in the middle of something. And I was really like the movements of the characters.
It's so subtle though, because they also have the character of the Todd, which is maybe the most cartoony character you could say in this movie, who's the fox, sort of a mischievous fox character who's already in the world of like the wild and killing and whatnot. And he's sort
Which
of
I
like,
found. Sorry,
But,
I found it ironic that they named him the Todd when Todd is the name of the fox from Fox and the Hound.
That's cute. Yeah, maybe someone that knows a little bit, but they got, he's like the most cartoony character, but it's very slight. It's not like some kind of anime like Pokemon animal or something. There is some style to this character, and just like the dogs have some style, but there's always just a very, it's just riding the line in a way that works really well of them still maintaining their very clear like animal nature. They feel like animals still.
There's that dynamic between the three of them. We have the two main characters. Snitter had a life, and Rolf did not. And then when they're forced to become in the wild, they meet this fox who kind of becomes their guide to live in the wild. I kind of would compare this, if you haven't seen the movie, I would compare it to something like in the Toy Story movies. There's the toys who have a view of what an owner is, who have been played with. The toys who have not been played with have a very different outlook on life. And that's very much the relationship between Snitter and the more pessimistic Rolf. He doesn't quite understand all the hubbub about having a master. And then there's also that untrustworthiness at first of when they meet the Todd, of this whole other life that neither one have experienced, of living in the wild.
Yeah, it made me think of the, in Toy Story 2, that just gut-wrenching, interlude where Jessie remembers her owner outgrowing her and eventually, leaving her. And
oh my
it's
god,
a bigger,
that's unwatchable. Oh my god, don't even talk about it. The song is gonna be in my head.
So Sarah McLachlan's song or whatever, and and it's a bigger sequence. Exactly. Oh yeah, it's horrible, and the book has a much bigger like flashback to Snitter having this idyllic life with his master who loved him, and it was just so heartbreaking. You only get a tiny glimpse of that here. Really, it focuses more on the accident, but I definitely was getting that idea about the way that dogs, any kind of domesticated animal depends on a human like that, and it's a real relationship, even if they're both perceiving it in fun different ways. But that's just so everything we've described so far, this is definitely there's an overwhelming just melancholy to this whole movie. The whole thing is just so sad and wistful. But there is some brutal stuff in there too, because like we said, it doesn't pull any punches with how it shows the animals being experimented on. And even when they're out killing sheep, we get some pretty gory shots of these sheep carcasses being eaten by crows and flies. And then there's this scene where, Snitter, who's always looking for a man that he can trust, goes up to a guy who calls him over and looks like he's going to be kind to him. And he sets down his shotgun, and Snitter jumps up, catches the trigger, and blows the guy's head off by accident. And now he's blaming himself for killing two possible kindly masters. And it's just brutal stuff.
If there was a reason I had like any hesitancy to see this movie when I first heard about it, like years and years ago, it was this scene. Like there were like images on like the early internet in the 2000s of the guy holding his face with all the blood and everything. And I was like, oh my god, what is this movie? So
It's
I
a
had the
scene
guts
like
to watch
no
this.
other, because it is. Yeah, we also have the layer of what's disturbing about it is also the fact that he blames himself and he feels bad about it. He has like, and yeah, as again, it's like, I've killed another human. Like, what's wrong with me? I think there's like a line or something. He's like tossing and turning with nightmares and stuff afterwards. And it's like everything bad comes from my head. And it's like, it's, he's scratching at his lobotomized head, and like, which is just a horrible depressive thing that sometimes you can probably think when you're actually really depressed, just like everything is all my fault. It all comes from me. And it's like, oh my God, there's no scene like that in movies. It's wild.
And this decision, this one accidental death that he causes, shapes the future of the characters, because earlier we see we see humans out and about. At one point, we see some humans at a gas station. There's a little domesticated dog that comes out of the car while they're talking and just kind of barks around and yips. And
it
that's
pisses
kind of
all over their shoes.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's kind of a view of like what could happen if they were adopted by masters. But by killing this one man, it creates a series of events where more people are against the dogs and more people are out looking for them. And that window into having a domesticated life immediately closes. They have a second chance at another life in the wilderness, but eventually something else happens to the Todd, and that door closes as well. And each death in this movie, each really major killing in this movie has an effect. It isn't there just to shock.
Yeah, and there's another scene where there's another guy who's aiming at Ralph out on the rocks and is about to kill him. And in the movie, the Todd ends up startling him basically, and he falls to his death. And actually, in the book, it's Snitter who does that. So, and that's his like third accidental victim.
Which it's isn't it a deleted? Is it a deleted scene? I can never tell if I've seen an extended version or not. But I know in the theatrical release,
so there's
it's cut
two
out.
movies.
Right.
Yeah. There's two versions of the movie. There's a theatrical and extended.
And the guy falls over, and there's this implication that they go down and they eat him. Like both dogs like go down and they like devour him. And there's even like I think you can find it on YouTube. I forget where I saw it, but there's a deleted scene like that, and they even like show a bit of his like corpse.
Yeah, I wasn't sure which version I watched because I did know there was an extended one, and in the one I watched, he falls, and when we go back to his body later, you can tell it's kind of torn open. So I didn't know if they cut out something in between there or if I was seeing the cutout thing.
I think you were seeing that. That's the cutout thing, I think. Yeah.
Okay, because it's very clear in the book that they're starving to death and they have to eat this man, and that just pushes along the press hysteria, afterwards. Even though they didn't kill him on purpose, but they would have died if they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just another thing.
And I really adore. It's something that I haven't really seen in a lot of movies, like done quite like this. The way we hear from the humans. We rarely ever cut to an actual scene of two scientists being like, "Did you leave the gate open? There are, where are those two dogs? They've been gone. Where are they?" And there's just voiceover chatter, like we're getting like radio signals and just like various conversations on top of each other as the movie advances, and we're just watching the dogs running across the highlands as this is happening, as things are snowballing, and throughout the movie we have just more and more voices that we are just hearing in the air, just like discussing like, oh, someone was killed, like it was a dog, like whatever, like there's these dogs, and then there's like further and further discussions about like, oh shit, this is bad. Like back at the scientists are trying to cover up everything because there may be a possibility of bubonic plague that was injected in the 2 dogs that maybe have just been spreading plague as they've been running across and having this wild adventure throughout this whole movie, which is another layer of awfulness and intensity.
And that's another example of book to film that I think is done so well. We have our main characters, and then out of nowhere, there's this voiceover from these humans that we've never met before. We don't know who they are. Eventually, it keeps happening, and then there become more scenes of humans talking to one another, but we never see their faces. It's just people looking at a map or sitting in a car or discussing the news, watching the news. It becomes not more what was once like a game of a phone tag among locals becomes a more prominent threat, and it begins to get wider coverage once we understand they're carrying the bubonic plague. And now you don't know, do we want them to succeed? Do we want them to find safety? Because if they do, they're going to start endangering these humans if they are carrying this thing.
And it couldn't be, it's another example of how this could not be any more of a departure from Disney, right? Where Disney, you have to explain like, okay, there's bad humans that are after them, so we have to create some villain that just represents everything that's coming after them. And he, like, there would be some scientist army character who, you know, we'd have to develop this stupid villain who has, you know, big stupid eyes or something, who's chasing them across the fields, and he would have to have a lackey that's following him along and whatnot. But there's none of that. It's just, they are all quite the opposite. They're just voices.
He would also have to be queer coded and have a big, luscious number.
Find me the plague dogs.
Yeah, I really love the voiceover element, and I think it does require a little bit of work from the viewer to kind of stay focused on like these kind of transitory scenes of the animals moving across the plains and like know who's going to be talking when. And there are a couple times it can get a little confusing, but there was a really funny one to me where the scientists are discussing how the situation has changed now that the story has gotten out and has changed so much into this plague rumor. And the specific line is, they say something like, you know, well, now that the media's gotten a hold of it, and this is while the animals are, of course, just like walking along. And my wife at this point was like, now, hold on. How would the Todd know what the media is? It took us a minute to reframe to like, oh, yeah, no, that's not the fox talking. That's the scientists in the lab somewhere.
It's Altman-esque. It's fucking Nashville every once in a while in this movie.
Yeah. My favorite one of these little interludes with the humans. My favorite one is near the end when we see a bunch of army men looking at a map, and the voice for the major is Patrick Stewart.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Patrick Stewart has a bit role in this movie.
He doesn't even get an animated face.
No, he does, but we see his hand. We see his. We see him hold a stick to the board.
Yeah, that's definitely his hand. You can tell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive into this particular aspect, because I don't want to belabor, you know, differences between the book and the movie, you know, neither of which probably a lot of people who are listening to this have either read or seen.
I'm curious.
But the book, which, by the way, like, I just finished before watching this movie, and I absolutely loved it, and I might go try to read Watership Down now because it was just so compelling. But it's a very different beast, I guess, you know, if you will. It's much more ambitious, I think, than Watership Down, from what I understand, and that, I mean, fully half of it is about these really significant human characters. So it very much is this, you know, it has this adventure going on with the dogs, which is brutal, but also has some humor to it. But it's also very much a satire about the media and how they concoct stories around them, about the government trying to cover their asses and deal with it themselves. And especially about, you know, scientists who are kind of overreaching in their pursuit of knowledge, without necessarily the wisdom about how to use it and the responsibility towards these, you know, vulnerable creatures. And, you know, a lot of that's just a typical difference between a novel and a movie, you know, that the book has all of these, you know, characters with these really significant arcs, you know, from the journalist character who in the movie version is Lynn Driver, who we actually do. I think that we like briefly see her face on TV and makes her one of the only people we get like a glimpse of in this. But it's a male named Digby Driver who's in the book, and he has a very big character with this whole arc and ends up actually trying to help the dogs as the search goes on. And there's this whole other layer. Basically, the movie is the equivalent of taking one thread out of the book and just adapting that. But I do think it's a really canny choice the way that they handle this, and they kind of make up for that by still giving us all of this important exposition that we just hear in voiceover. And it gives us at least some faint echoes of those different themes that are explored in the book and not so much in the movie, because the movie basically makes those points just by staying with the plight of the animals. So I think it's good because it's just a really smart adaptation choice to deliberately kind of exclude the humans, but still keep them as kind of this Greek chorus commenting on things. And also it doesn't, you know, get into any explicit kind of discussion or, you know, lecturing about humans' responsibility to animals. It kind of lets the situation speak for itself. But on kind of the flip side of that, I think it does take some of the layers away from the story, where basically we do have a single arc of these animals that are being experimented on and they escape, and they're continually, you know, victimized and chased around and unable to find a place in the world until they reach a, you know, rather inevitable, tragic end. And so I think that's maybe where the adaptation aspect of this kind of comes into play a little bit, where the way that it keeps giving us this voiceover and there's lots of fade in and fades outs like over and over. So it's very episodic with these little snippets. And I think it's during those parts that kind of the seams start to show a little bit of like, I can tell that it's adapting something a little bigger and more epic and trying to kind of get it all in there, which I thought was a much bigger problem with the Watership Down movie than with this one. I think this does work better as an adaptation, because Watership Down, I did get a sense almost like I was kind of getting the cliff notes of the book. Like it seems like these characters could be a lot richer and there's a lot of action and we're kind of missing a lot.
Yeah, it's a weakness of that one.
And that's something without having read the book that I'm observing. So it just feels like an adaptation, even though I wasn't really comparing it to anything. With this, I'm a little more biased because, you know, I was just coming out of this full 12-course meal, you know, of a book. And this kind of just focuses in on the most, you know, sorrowful part of it.
I think that was a good decision on their part then. I mean, the movie's only about an hour and a half. So why not just focus on a specific aspect of it? Because no book to movie adaptation is ever going to be perfect. I think this was, that's probably what the director saw when he read the book. He saw impact from the more morose parts of the book, and that's what he chose to focus on. I think that works.
Yeah. And I think that is, for the most part, something I approve of as far as adaptations, or even in like biopics. I feel like it's like always just better to just like find a specific thread and emphasize that if you really don't have, you know, the gumption and the ability to really bring all the threads together, which, yeah, quite often is just not going to work in a 90-minute movie. But yeah, I'm very curious about the book. I would love to read it someday.
Same.
I definitely recommend it, and there's so much more to it, and it ends in a wildly different place than this movie does too. So you really can watch this movie and then I think still go enjoy the book and feel the suspense, because it is very this doesn't really spoil anything, I would say.
Well, are we to the ending? Because it is one of the most
quite an
effective,
ending.
Like
It's
quite an ending. It's really, and if you think it's gonna wrap up in a nice little way, it does not. Not in any way. It does not. They ultimately are chased all the way to the water, and there's men with guns after them, firing at them as they hop into the water, and they're swimming. And the whole thing is it gets mistier and mistier. The implication could be that they're already dead, perhaps, but and then the little terrier is leading the way, of course, like he's been leading the way the entire movie, and he says, "Rolf, there's an island. I can see an island." And Rolf chooses to follow him. They keep swimming for this island that we don't see as audience members, and we can only hope is there. And the movie ends, basically.
And Snitter was the one who doubted himself with his visions. And this time, I think he changes his mind and he says, there is no island. And Rolf accepts it. No, it's there. We're going to find it.
That's
the implication. Yeah, the implication being it's probably not there. They're probably just going to die if they're not already. But the movie chooses to make it ambiguous when, after we see the final shot of the movie, when we go to the credits, we cut to the image of an island in the background. That could be something that they saw in their heads, or maybe it was there.
Maybe they
and then with the uplifting song at the end, that makes it even more ambiguous. We don't know exactly what happened. I think it's leaning more towards they didn't make it, but there's a possibility of hope.
Yeah, I love that you brought up Ralph's that he has an arc in this movie in that way, that he started out wanting to die in the lab and not wanting to go off of any, like, even if there's a shred of possibility of escape, it's not enough for him to indulge these ideas. And after a while, like once he's actually paddling there, but it's worth it now. I get it. It's worth it for me to try, and worth it for me to try and push towards this thing that, might not be there, but my other choice is death. It's pretty great. And yeah, what a crazy way of ending a movie. Yet again, like, of course, like all the blood and intense themes in this movie are no-nos as far as talking animal movies for kids. But the other thing is, in those movies, is like ambiguity cannot exist. There cannot be like, and especially an ambiguous ending, like unheard of.
Yeah, there has to be black and white, morally good, morally bad, no in between. And what I love about, if you watch the movie to the end, you've probably gotten over the fact of animals killing each other in brutal ways and animals dying, and you've probably accepted the fact if you made it to the end of the movie. What I enjoyed about this ending was they kind of chose this. They knew they could die, but they chose to die with dignity, and they knew this was their option, but so be it. This is what they chose, and I think there's something beautiful about that. It's all about free will, about this this concept of free will. They could have gone back to the lab at any time and died. They could have tried to survive in the wilderness and be shot, but they said, if we're going to go out, we're going to do it our way. And even though they probably do die, it's still such a satisfying ending in that respect.
Yeah, and it's the way that the basically that exact point happens in the book, and it seems like that's where it is going to end. And apparently that's where Richard Adams originally intended it to end, and the original manuscript ended in a similar way. And at some point, I guess he was talked into expanding more on that from his publisher. And it's so the book at that point kind of ruptures, and there's this little colloquy like between the reader and the author, and basically the reader asking, how can you let this happen to Snitter and Ralph after everything they've been through? And I'm not going to spoil anything that happens on from there. If I did describe it, I think you would probably think that it was an absolute atrocity of like the way that it like contrives things. But I do think it works on the page, and there's a real like big emotional force behind it. In this context of this movie, it would have been a terrible choice. Like if you can imagine that they go out there and then they somehow live like probably happily ever after in some way, that wouldn't really gel with this grim ass bleak movie that we've gotten. So it is nice to see this as kind of an alternate look at what the book might have been too. But I think the book builds the foundation and has enough of different tones and everything to it that it can make it work. Where this is very laser focused on the sorrow.
For sure. And again, it is such a the only I noticed that it's the same year as The Wall came out, which
Yes.
is another like step in the direction of like dreary, intense animation on screen for like a mainstream audience, or at least attempts at such things. Maybe the only thing this year that came out that year that I can compare. Again, like another example of this 80s attempt or 70s attempt at like legitimacy for adult animated regular features is like the Lord of the Rings adaptation by Bakshi 2, which has a more of a PG-13 kind of leaning with the style and they I think it is just interesting to look at these and see like what might have been if audiences would have embraced these things more, and they just were not embraced. There's an interview that I found online, I think that accompanies the Blu-ray of Plague Dogs, with the director, and he talks about just like how instantaneous the backlash was with the movie, and the theaters just like it just not going anywhere, and like women coming up to him after the fact and it's like, who's the director? I want to talk to the director, and things like that. It's just
they had Karen's back in 82.
I think they did.
Nothing has changed.
Karen's mom.
This got a cinema score F back in the 80s.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it is such a shame that we like you can look in like other cultures like Japan, obviously there's lots of mainstream like, and again, not just extreme like animated movies that were like in theaters, but yeah, these sort of like middle ground, like some of it is an adventure movie and some of it has some blood and some of it even has some, intense sexual themes or something. But yeah, these like gray area movies just sort of got just kicked out of the mainstream theaters.
And it was almost impossible to find them in theaters back then. It was mostly late night programs that would play them in the 80s. Programs like Night Flight. You might see at like 2 a.m. a movie like The Plague Dogs might pop up, and you're like, oh, what is this weird cartoon that I'm watching? Especially here in the States, almost impossible to get a screening when animation was still seen very much as something for children.
Yeah,
just
we are
imagine
the
the
land of Disney.
8-year-olds.
So
Just imagine the like 8 or 9-year-olds who, are watching TV late at night and then get traumatized unexpectedly by
Look at the
something like
puppy.
this.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is
And I mean,
nothing
we keep on
compared
bringing
to,
up.
like, you
Yeah.
think you saw Bambi's mom and that was bad? It's like, no, here's something else.
Dude, Bambi's
It's-
mom got it over with and done.
Oh yeah.
That
And
was
she
a walk
died
in the
off
park.
screen too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
We didn't see her brutally shot by man.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, this is
Yeah.
this is the point usually where we answer the question if we would unwatch a movie, either because we don't like it or because it is just such a bummer. And I mean, I won't answer for you guys, although it seems like everyone is pretty enthusiastic about this movie, right?
Yeah, I really adore this movie. Actually, it was, I don't know, it was a big eye opener for me as far as animation was concerned, and what animation could do as far as being a legitimate vehicle for a real serious feature.
I absolutely love this movie. It is a legitimate adult film. It just happens to feature talking animals, and it just happens to be a cartoon. If you can get over that, and you can just accept it for a serious story of two fugitives on the run finding themselves and figuring out their place in life, then you can enjoy this movie. It is a beautiful hidden gem.
Yeah, I'm definitely glad that I watched that and Watership Down. And I do think that this was an improvement on Watership Down as far as in terms of as an adaptation and in the storytelling and the emotional power of it. If I'm a little less enthusiastic about it, it might just be because I was wanting a little more of an arc besides the the torment being piled on. However, that is the power this movie has is basically the way that it commits to that melancholy all the way to the bitter end, and it very much does that. And it makes a very stark and powerful impression. So, and if above all else, I am very glad that it got me to read this book that I absolutely love too, that I probably wouldn't have otherwise. So I say read it, watch it, and come back tomorrow.
And it's for those interested, it's free on YouTube. It's free on Tubi, I believe. And there is a Blu-ray from Shout Factory.
Yeah. If you can find good fidelity, it's worth it for this one, I would say.
The print I watched was beautiful,
gorgeous,
very good looking.
Yeah.
Now that brings us to our next film.
No more dogs, now cats.
Now we're switching over to cats. And there's other similarities between these that I was surprised by as far as an aspect of medical experimentation on animals. So there's kind of a link there as well. But Felidae, besides switching from dogs to cats, is a very different beast. I swear I'll stop these puns at some point. It's just so easy. And and this is, if anything, an even more adult story, at least in terms of graphic content, if not sensibility. And this was something I'd never heard of before either. And I'm sure it's probably a little more obscure, but you can find it on YouTube just as easily as the Plague Dogs.
I would add too, though, if you go to YouTube to find this movie, currently as of this recording, there's one video that has everything except like the last couple minutes, and then there's a bunch of other videos that are just little pieces of the movie. So you might have to watch more than one video to see the whole thing.
There you go.
There's also two different versions, one with an English dub and one that's in the original German language with subtitles, which is what I watched, and I would recommend. I guess I didn't see the English dub, but I've heard that it's not great with the translations because it wasn't like this was never officially wide released in America with an English version.
This wasn't going anywhere.
No,
it was more of a basic dub.
No English home video release of this movie.
Yeah, and generally I try to watch even animated films in their original language just because, the performances are modulated exactly the way it was intended to. Though it would be nice to be able to soak in, the visuals a little bit more without worrying about the subtitles, at least when it comes to animation. But still, I was happy that I watched it that way.
I couldn't find that. I had to watch it with the dub, and the dub sucks.
That's what I heard.
I think the dub's really.
I thought it was okay.
Annoying.
It's very rushed.
Yeah, some of it's good. Some of it is very clearly like poorly translated. There's like all kinds of like maybe like sped up sentences or like, okay, I guess that word is appropriate, but not really. And I find what's his name, the main character's voice to be kind of grating for some reason. Francis, yes.
He sounds like Wishbone.
Yeah.
Oh my lord.
Like dirty Wishbone. Could we take a little break?
Sure.
Is that possible? Thanks. I'll run to the bathroom.
Take 5. I also watched the dub because I couldn't find the German version.
I sent you
on
the
YouTube.
link, you motherfucker.
Well, then I also couldn't find your link.
Oh my god, you suck.
Yeah, well, I watched it like right before we recorded this anyway. I was still recovering from plague dogs.
Well, that's good. I was afraid everyone watched the original German version but me, so.
Well, good. We have a good mix then. You need those harsh German, accents to really sell this.
1, 2, 3. They have to scream it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really know what goes into like making a dub for a movie like this. It did seem like there was some thought put into like the voice actors, and like they all kind of had the affect that I would expect like actors playing animated cats to have in like a Disney movie or something. So it like kind of worked. It didn't feel like other dubs I've seen where it like just completely takes you out of what's happening in the movie. But yeah, like Seth was saying, there's definitely points where you're like, oh, I don't think that's what they wanted to say there.
Yeah, and you can generally get away with that a little bit more in animation, as far as matching the lips and stuff. But yeah, there's definitely a difference between just having dubs that they put on a DVD so you can listen to it in multiple different languages, and them actually putting a team on it and casting it to make an English version like they do with like Miyazaki films, when they come over to the US. So this didn't get, whoever like John Mulaney and Tom Hanks in the roles like to take over the characters.
It didn't, but as someone who has seen a lot of dubs from not just Japan, but many different countries, they did a pretty good job of keeping the lip syncing the best that they could.
Oh,
even
cool.
though they
Yeah,
didn't
that's
get
not bad.
Many A-listers or anything like that.
Yeah, so this Felidae, oh, and there's a cat. Speaking of cats,
Showed up just in time.
probably should have said up front, I think that generally on Unwatchables we're big animal people. Like when I grew up, my dad always had anywhere from 3 to like 7 different little dogs, and currently I've got 2 rabbits who are a little over 10 years old now. I got 3 cats, and it was 4 for a little until the one that Tony just held up they adopted because they just keep showing up on our porch and we're running out of space. But definitely a big cat person, and I had that in mind. I watched this movie with my cats. They didn't seem to mind it.
Yeah, they're just like, what?
Yeah.
Rated R movie.
But that did make some stuff.
Hey.
Yeah, it did make some stuff, get under my skin a little bit. But just for some background,
both these movies are definitely going to get. That's what the unwatchable aspect is. Even if they are animated, they are going to, if not disturb you and like make the animal and lover in you cry. This movie, perhaps is more on the side of like it just makes me feel awkward or something because there's all these weird like animal sex scenes and animals farting and shitting and peeing and dying and I don't know.
Yeah, this is basically a seedy murder mystery that's full of graphic bloodletting and violence, but it's acted out by cats. And is this actually based on a novel, a 1989 crime novel by, I'll just take a stab at this name, Akif Perinci. He's a Turkish-born German author, and there's actually an 8-book series of Felidae novels, although only 3 of them were ever translated into English, including the one that this movie was based on. And even the book is kind of hard to find now because this author, I guess, got into some right-wing extremist kind of parties, made lots of incendiary comments about Islamic immigration and specifically some sort of tasteless Holocaust joke or statement he made in a speech that immediately caused him to be dropped by all his publishers, boycotted. I don't even think you can buy the book on Amazon anymore because they just delisted everything.
Yes.
And but he did co-write the script for the film, which again isn't the most accessible thing, but you can find it on YouTube. But at the time in 1994, apparently this was the most expensive animated German film ever.
It was, yeah. And you can see it in the animation. It looks pretty slick, especially for a foreign flick imported to the U.S. Looks pretty nice.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I do think, to our conversation about plague dogs and style is what it lacks for sure. I find a lot of the character designs and even the backgrounds are probably the highlight, and even them are just sort of like, I don't know, they're fine. But the character design is just, I find very lacking and kind of boring, like just very basic. Like these are animated cats with cartoony faces. It's kind of not so much blurring the line between anthropomorph and actual like animal very well. It just feels like cartoon cats that are naughty and solving crimes.
I think overall it has a nice 90s animation renaissance look to it. It looks a bit like something that Disney or Don Bluth would have put out.
It has
and we do, I mean, we'll explore this later on, but there are some more abstract elements in the movie. But yeah, I kind of have to go with Seth on some of the character designs. Just did not work for me. I'm sure they worked a lot better in the book, but there's a few characters that I was a little uncomfortable with the way they looked. It could be better, but overall it looked very nice. Not as stylistic, not as unique as the Plague Dogs. A lot more mainstream look of the times, but still pretty nice.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more on the positive side about it. I definitely see what Seth's saying about the character design, and this is definitely more typical. But I guess I thought that there was still a lot of very like moody lighting and atmosphere throughout that I still generally liked how it looked. And maybe it's because, I don't know, the version that I watched was in really good quality too, which sounds like there's a lot of not very good looking ones out there on YouTube. And since I was the only one who watched the German language version, I think that I probably watched the best looking like transfer of it, I'm guessing.
That could be my issue. That could be my issue.
With the dub, if you're watching the dub, because we've never gotten a proper English release, every version you've seen is a bootleg. So if you did watch, I would imagine it looked a lot better than what we saw.
Yeah, although it is interesting that the director, it's like Michael Schaack, I think, doesn't have a very extensive filmography. I mean, there were some German animated films in there I'd never heard of. The thing that I did recognize was an English language Pippi Longstockings film, which is like that kind of thing I never watched, but I can picture the like VHS cover of it, you know, seeing it like in the store.
Pippi Longstocking.
Yeah.
very German Pippi Longstocking.
Yeah.
A lot of blood and sex and piss.
Yeah. And so I don't know. This doesn't have as much of a pedigree behind it, I think. Although I still think this probably looks better than the Pippi Longstocking film. I don't know. I do feel like you could kind of see the money on the screen with a lot of the different sequences in there. But just
Especially
to give
the dream sequences, similar to Plague Dogs,
Yes.
it has these like intense dream sequences. Which, yeah, like how can you not utilize that when it comes to animation? Because it's just like it's just a reminder of like, oh yeah, I can do whatever I want. It's an animated movie. Anything that I can draw can occur. And yeah, there's some crazy nightmare scenes in this movie. They're probably the major highlight and definitely some of the most quote unquote unwatchable aspects of the movie.
Yeah, I feel like the dream sequences would be something that like someone puts on YouTube and says, really effed up children's movie or something like that, and
Oh,
it
yeah,
would
and
get like 2 million views.
Yeah, this one is total just bait for that. It's so just asking for YouTube montages of just like, yeah, how does this exist? And I agree. It's weird that it exists.
they could put it with that nightmare sequence from The Brave Little Toaster.
Yeah.
That I've
Which
seen
one?
on YouTube.
Which one is my question?
Oh yeah, well yeah, it depends. There's the one with
The whole
air
movie?
conditioner, and then later
Yeah, the
on,
whole
there's-
movie.
Yeah, that's pretty.
Mhm.
But that is an actual children's film, and this is very,
It is.
very not. I don't like if this did come out. I think this would get an R rating if this
Yeah.
was in the America.
Yeah, where Plague Dogs is more of this PG-13. It's more in that rated R thing. I think it's still, though, in a weird spot where it's just trying to be, again, and we keep on bringing up Bakshi. We will do an episode on Bakshi and Fritz the Cat, but like, you know, Fritz the Cat, for instance, is just like there to, for the sake of like, can you believe we can have tits in cartoons now? Can you believe we can have blood in cartoons? And that's like the whole shtick of the movie, just like for 90 minutes. This movie is more hung up on this idea of, I think, just sort of, I don't know, just not thinking about animation ideas, right? That like tropes that we're supposed to associate, or like ideas of an audience for animation. It is sort of just like a regular crime thriller that just happens to star animated cats.
Yes.
This
This movie is a film noir with cats.
Yeah, it really depends on that dissonance between the two forms of the crime thriller kind of noir, thing being acted out by cats, and that's
every
really
once in a
what
while, I think I'm just watching a Saturday morning cartoon, and then I'm like suddenly reminded by watching two cats fuck that this is not a Saturday morning cartoon.
Yeah,
it's a Saturday morning cartoon until you see like a cat's anus.
Lots of cat
in clear view. Yeah,
this is there's the rumored butthole cut of the musical Cats, which may or may not actually be true, where they had to digitally remove the buttholes, but they didn't. The buttholes are an integral part of the design of this film.
Boy, they are. Well, yeah. Should we get to the what this weird little movie actually is about? Part.
Yeah, I'll be really brief for that, because it's a standard kind of murder mystery, basically, where our main character Francis moves with his owner into a new house, and there's strange things going on in the basement and in the attic, and there's cats that are turning up dead all over the neighborhood and brutally murdered with their throats torn out, sometimes disemboweled or beheaded. And he basically, meets some of his cat friends and starts uncovering this big mystery. It involves a cult. It involves a lab of animal experimentation that was shut down, and it's just him unraveling the mystery from that point on.
Yeah, and like any noir movie. Oh, well, I was just going to say, like a noir movie, there are a lot of different noir figures. We have the femme fatale, potential love interest, and then the red herring. You have the info dump character that is there to serve as exposition. You have his Watson sidekick that helps him along.
Bluebeard.
It is a murder mystery with cats, but kind of like our last movie, it's also cats behaving like cats. They do not get up and walk around like Puss in Boots and put on human clothing. They are just normal cats.
With buttholes.
With buttholes, yeah.
Yeah, this cat sex scene that we keep referencing too, which is our main character who gets seduced by this cat, is a very realistic cat, seduction and mating. If you've ever been lucky enough to witness that.
God, it's so gross.
It's
my absolute favorite part
sex.
of this. The best part of this scene to me is there's this pan at the end of the scene. There's this pan to the trees, and the animators they decided this is a good place to stop. So the animation cell just kind of freezes. It's one cell of the cats for a few seconds as we're panning up to the trees for a fade out. And it's Francis looking into his lady friend cat's butthole. And we see that on screen just as it is for a few seconds, a little too long.
Yeah, to me, they pan up to the tree branches to get away from the oral cat sex going on, and to me, it really looked like two crows were up in the trees and they were fucking. I don't know if that's real.
The two crows were watching.
I thought they were fucking and watching. I don't know, but
crows
I don't
notorious
put anything
warriors.
past this evil movie. That was too much for me. The furries probably spawned a lot of furries, All about
I have no doubt it spawned a lot of furries.
It's got to be in the pantheon. It's there's just a lot of talk of the cats are just constantly talking about sex. They're constantly wanting sex, and there's a lot of innuendos and things. There's a lot of weird and I was looking for this a little bit once I found out the guy was kind of a shithead and possibly racist or a Nazi. There's weird sort of homophobic remarks every once in a while that I picked up in certain scenes where they're talking about oh, you've been frequenting, you're one of the gay cats or something like that. They're just insulting each other, these men cats, just talking about how you're probably a gay cat, huh? Weird, you're going to the homo cat bars, weird stuff like that, which are just already uncomfortable. And I'm just coming out of the mouths of these Saturday morning cartoon cats.
The one cat might even be gay or bi. I don't know, but he calls Francis pretty many times.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
the big bear cat.
Yeah,
and
that's one cat I did not like his design. He was very ugly to look at.
He's so generic looking.
Oh, the one-eyed cat that is his
friend. Very boxy looking.
Yeah, and there's these other cats who are giant and don't resemble cats at all, and I kind of wondered what was going on with them.
Yeah.
Are they dogs? What are they?
Yeah. The designs are really weird to look at. They're just what even is that? An ear? Is that a beard? What is that? And yeah, that big guy is really weird. His girlfriend, well, that's the whole thing. How does it work? They keep on finding murdered cats, and they're pretty grisly murder scenes that they happen upon of these cats. And they realize in various states of sexual arousal. Is one of the clues.
Yeah, they're all chasing females in heat. And that's what they had.
Definitely
so a talk about that.
I would, I was asking for. I know everybody's asking for that plot line.
And that does factor into the, discoveries made about the mystery and what's going on here. But you're right. One of the most unwatchable parts of this is that, these are very graphic. You see their throats torn out. You see their intestines coming out of their bellies. You see that, the blind cat has her head torn off and doesn't pull any punches with that. But I thought the most disturbing part was when Francis comes across this video of medical experiments that this Professor Preterius does, where he's testing this tissue adhesive, and he keeps trying to use it, and it just burns right through the flesh of the cat. It like melts their skulls, and you see them struggling and in pain, and being
you get a
tied
close-up
down
of them making incisions and of all kinds of shit.
That was the roughest part for me. Because it's
that was like the opening minutes to Plague Dogs.
Right.
It's true. Yeah, I didn't realize just how thematically linked these were in a way. Although, I mean, we can get into it later. I think this one has a lot less to do with like the actual animals or the idea of animal dignity or like humans being good to animals and things like that. This seems very much more just like, again, it just happens to have cats in it. It seems to maybe want to say something about, because there is like an anti, like humanity is like being cruel to animals and whatnot. And the cats talk about it a lot. And there's obviously the lab scene, which is really disturbing, but it doesn't really like push into it any more than any movie that's trying to be edgy is doing, which is like, it's very easy to just say like, man is the worst. Like that's basically the extent of it with this movie.
I would say this movie has everything to do with cats because they keep tying back to the title of the movie, the Felidae, that they explained was their ancestor. That was the version of the cats that was back in ancient Egypt that was worshipped by the Egyptians. And they come from this bloodline. And the cats that we see on screen are this imperfect version that have de-evolved over time. So we have this movie all about the origin of cats, and then also just normal things that cats do. Like after they have sex, they smell. There's that aroma around them that becomes very integral to the mystery.
That's true.
I feel like there's just a lot of moments in this movie of just cats being cats, and it's very such a specific thing that if you're a cat owner, you'll be watching the movie, you'll be like, oh, my cat's done that,
Interesting.
Yeah,
that's true.
I do think it does a good job of making this kind of a feline specific plot that unfolds. And there is, the explanation does have this kind of like, they bring up Mendel and there's kind of a eugenics kind of thing going on, right?
Which is interesting in the context
purify,
of this guy possibly being a Nazi or like Nazi sympathizer or Holocaust denier, which makes this like even stranger in hindsight.
Yeah, and when they get to the end and he says something like, this cat has lost his innocence and so has man. I wasn't really buying into this having like that particular kind of thematic resonance. Even though it is dealing with stuff like purifying the race or getting back to our genetic thing, it's really just the resolution to the mystery. I don't think it gets particularly deep with that, but it does throw it out there, and it is, kind of interesting to see that applied to like wild cats and the way that they breed and reproduce out in the wild. But
strangely
the
specific.
feline equivalent to the Aryan race, if you will.
Sure.
Which is like a lot of that is surrounded by one of the other more disturbing scenes, which is this cult that is sort of sprouting up around these ideas of cat eugenics, which we are introduced to kind of early on in this crazy scene where the cats there's like a big cat and he's preaching all this crazy shit about sort of this like cat martyr that they worship, and the cats are jumping into this like bunch of electricity and shocking themselves as like part of this like crazy ritual, and it's so intense and weird, and I've never seen that. Yet another thing where you're just like, what is this movie doing? What's happening?
They all worship this cat who supposedly died in these experiments by a Dr. Pretorius.
Yeah, I think that's
Is it?
right.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I believe his name was definitely Dr. Pretorius from Bride of Frankenstein. I feel like that
Oh,
was definitely on purpose.
Oh, you're right. I knew I
And-
recognized that name.
The gay scientist from Doctor Strange.
Yes,
Bride
yes,
Strange?
Yes, yeah.
the actor who played him in real life was gay. Yeah.
Yeah, the guy with the little jars with tiny people in them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, there you go.
But eventually the cats stumble on the video of him doing the scientific experiments, and he is also in the dream sequence. Francis has more than one grisly dream about the murder, and I think when we think of the dream sequences, both are pretty messed up, but we're probably thinking of the first one, where it's a giant priest rises from the ground with a bunch of cats on strings like marionettes, but they're all dead bodies.
Oh,
And
crazy.
Seth, you brought up the wall earlier. I immediately
Very
when I
wall,
saw
yeah.
that, I thought of Scarfe, who is the animator on the wall, and also the character designer on Disney's Hercules, Scarfe. And it looks very much like his animation. They slowed the frame rate down, and it's very sketchy looking. And if you see this and you put this next to animation of the wall side by side, like you would see the similarities. It just amps up the nightmarish factor of the dream sequences even more. It's a lot less polished than the sequences that we see that are in reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, more
Yeah.
interesting.
And those surreal dream sequences were definitely my favorite part of the movie because they are kind of scary and they're really out there. And it just kind of ties back to, me saying that in Watership Down, I really liked when they got impressionistic and, used all of those possibilities of animation. And so that was definitely what got me most excited here was when they were exploiting that. There's another one, I think, before that where this faceless doctor is putting like a chain leash around Francis and the house is morphing around him. And yeah, they're very cool looking. They're very eerie. And those were definitely the high points of the film for me.
I would say the humans too are also animated differently. In the Plague Dogs, we never really, except for that woman on TV, we never really see the faces of the humans. But in this one, we see the humans a lot more clearly. They have a bit of a sketchy style to them, kind of a 70s Disney or Don Bluth kind of style, where you can still kind of see the pencil lines in the animation, compared to the cats, where you don't. It's very smooth and very flat. So I appreciated that aspect. It seemed they were drawing the humans deliberately to be in a different animation style.
The can openers, that's what the cats call them.
That's right. That's right. The can openers.
Humans are just can
That's
openers.
all we are to them.
I think cat owners could probably relate. Sometimes you're just a can opener.
Jeez.
They
Let me
only
say
love
too
you
that
because you feed them.
they're certainly not happy if you don't. And I do want to say though that this cat that Francis's owner is a terrible cat owner. I mean, he's got his unneutered male cat just running around town, having sex, getting involved in murders, fighting with other cats. He doesn't seem to ever know what's going on. So shame on Gustav.
Well, Francis does describe him initially as mentally defective. One of the first lines that tells you this is not a child movie for sure.
See, I don't think that line was in the subtitles that version that I watched. Maybe I'll have to
I
go
do think
back
I
and
would like it
compare
better
them.
with the German. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also a lot more, and I don't know if this was edited down for the dubbed version, but there's a lot of these moments of just silly, like black space, just fade to blacks every once in a
There's a
while.
lot
Like
of
it feels like there's like a
cuts.
commercial break, which is just such a like annoying thing in a feature film.
Yeah, that happened so much in the movie. It got annoying when that happened. It was like a direct-to-video movie where you've got like several episodes kind of like thrown together. It is a very episodic story, but there was like no flow sometimes from one scene to the other. You could tell that a lot of people worked on this movie. That's why it was so expensive. They had hired a lot of people on this thing, but because of that, I have to wonder what the direction was like,
They just had
what the boarding
chunks.
process was like. Yeah, it was all animated in chunks, is my guess, and
It
that's
doesn't
why
help
there's
the
so many.
credibility, yeah.
Yeah,
That's weird too, because I mean, I definitely noticed in Plague Dogs that there was a lot of fading to black and back in. I mean, I think easily as much as in this, but I guess that there felt more consistent in that, or maybe it happened more quickly, like there was as far as transitions go in that.
Well, yeah, Plague Dogs just feels so much more like filmic and cinematic. To me, it feels so much more like a worthy theatrical feature. Where I don't know, something about Felidae just really strikes me as like a glorified, like I don't know, and maybe it is just from seeing it in 2022 and not understanding certain parts of like what it might have been like to see it in its time, but it really does still feel like kind of a glorified episode on TV or a made for TV movie or something in comparison. So a lot of those black spaces wind up feeling more just like, oh, there should have been commercials.
yeah, no, like I still think the animation looks pretty darn good for like a major release in another country, but no, I see what you mean with that. The staff on Plague Dogs I know was pretty small, from what I can tell, and I noticed that the multiplane camera only had two guys working it, and I guess for those not in the know, multiplane camera was it was a type of camera made to show different layers of animation, so we can show foreground, middle ground, and background. I guess the best example of that, think like a 16-bit video game where you have the character in the foreground, then you have several layers of background. But there were only two guys operating this giant, heavy piece of machinery. Some of the most complex multiplane shots that I have ever seen in any movie, they have done it in the Plague Dogs. There's a shot of the dogs inside an old barn talking about accidentally killing the man, and it does this weird, crazy pan around to another window, zooms into the window, and we get back into the conversation. I lost my mind when I saw that. Felidae doesn't really do anything that spectacular with its shots. It is pretty standard movie fare, just moving the camera left to right, up and down. I don't think a multiplane was used, if I'm remembering what I saw. Like they make up for it with some of the dream sequences, but overall nothing you wouldn't have seen that was on TV, really.
Yeah, all it takes is the right two guys, I guess.
Yeah.
And geez, sorry about the dog. I feel like every time you bring up Plague Dogs, the dog next door starts barking. It's only fitting. It's his favorite movie.
Yeah.
It's
Boy,
so
that's
deep. Woof.
it would bum out a dog. But yeah, and I think that just even besides visually, this is still, I mean, a pretty insubstantial, substance-wise movie that it really is just about unraveling the mystery. And I am kind of curious how involving you guys found that as far as, putting together the clues and everything, because there was a certain point, I mean, not that far in, where I felt like I got ahead of everything, where the guy who ends up being the bad guy, I was thinking this is the bad guy. This is not who he says he is. And
yes, the old cat with the computer, which it's a great staple of a 90s movie. Anyone who has a computer and he's building like a database of various cats in the neighborhood, just amazing. The other,
I think
Francis his mind is blown. And it's just like, we have a list on a computer screen of names. Amazing.
I think what gave it away really was through animation. It wasn't really through any dialogue or anything that gave this character away as being the big bad, but there was one quick shot where he gives like a bit of an evil glance. He does like a bit of an evil grin, and I was like, he's the bad guy. Every other character is like a red herring. It's this one guy with the computer at the beginning.
It's always the guy with the computer.
It seems like a type that you would see in a movie like this, like the guy who is always helping the main character, and it's always a twist that he ends up being the one who's behind everything, and he has nefarious plans for the main character. So that all seemed kind of boilerplate as far as what to expect. And when we do see that video of the medical experiments, I feel like it lays out what must be going on pretty clearly, as far as, you know, that's where we learn about this race of, or how the doctor wants to breed this Claudandos cat. At least that was the name in the German version.
Claudandos.
And yeah. And that's so you know that it has something to do with it wanting to further the bloodline of this cat, and that this cat must still be alive. I feel like it just laid a lot out. That
the doctor's really drunk the whole time when he's doing all the experiments. He's just like constantly drinking, and then they like do a montage of him doing all these horrible things to cats, and then one of the lab assistants like walks out and he's like, "Oh, you son of a bitch, you don't know how brilliant this all is."
So where did you guys end up ultimately with this movie then? You know, would you watch it either for it not being worth all the gross stuff, or not enjoying it, or were you just kind of, you know, middling is kind of the sense that I'm getting, but maybe not?
You first, Aaron.
I think you might be surprised. The way we've been talking about this movie, I think it sounds like we've been pretty harsh on it. But when I watched it, I didn't expect it to be nearly as good as it was. I know it sounds like we're being pretty middle of the road with it, but I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I would not unwatch it. It has some flaws, definitely. And when it comes to, I mean, obviously I haven't read the book. I would like to now after seeing it, but obviously I haven't read the book. But this does kind of what you shouldn't do with adaptations, and that's try to cram everything in. They really try to put a lot of stuff in the movie, and that can make it confusing. And yeah, I knew who the bad guy was, but it was so unique in its aspect of cats being cats, and just this ancestral plot line, this weird sexual aspect to it that really did play into the story. And just seeing, I think just seeing a big budgeted animated film from Germany that could look like an animated film from America, it could easily masquerade as one if you're watching the dub and you didn't know that this was a foreign flick. Not to the levels of like a Disney movie at the time, but definitely at least direct to video. And I was just impressed. It was something that hadn't been on my radar. And anytime I see like a movie for adults from that time period that is not Ralph Bakshi, that is not an anime or something else, like a Nelvana film, just seeing that from like the 70s through 90s, that era where we would get an occasional adult animated movie. Finding another one is always it is always such a joy to be like, how did this slip past me? How did I not see this? And I found myself interested in the mystery, and the horrifically dark aspects of it. So yeah, I really enjoyed this movie, and I watched this movie in chunks, but every time I watched a little bit of it, I could not wait to see what happened. So I think that alone, I would say no. I would definitely not unwatch this. Not for people that are sensitive to animal maulings and animal killings, obviously, but I was prepared for that going in, and I really liked it.
Yeah, I'm very interested in the movie itself. I think there's a lot of interesting things in it. The dream sequences, obviously the sort of like what the fuck, like disturbing, strange aspects of it that are just so like still very novel in a movie like this that is just it feels like it's from another timeline where this was allowed, which just really was not. And it is interesting to see a movie from this time period that does go to such extreme places. I think I was surprised by the end. I was kind of intrigued in the net of the plot line, which I think is really just something to attribute to the author of the book, which I'm sure we're only getting like a percentage of like what all was going on with like the film noir network of, you know, who's doing what to who and stuff like that. I did find that interesting by the end because I was kind of in the middle. I think I wind up pretty lukewarm about it. Just as a sit down, watch it kind of experience, I'm a little lukewarm about it, just because I think it's just maybe a animation preference too that it just didn't really strike me all that much. And you know, and maybe it's just I'm comparing it to Plague Dogs as well because we're doing it for this podcast. But I do think it's kind of like, I don't know, for me, it maybe loses its chance to really utilize the animal aspect of the story. But you brought up good points that it is like utilizing like biological and like basic facts of like the way cats work, which I think is like, again, very unique. It's very unique. I can at least say that. I wouldn't unwatch it because it is a weird part of animation history for sure.
And just piggybacking on what you said, um, I do wonder how that would be with rewatching this movie. I don't know if my reaction would be the same upon rewatch. I don't know if it would become a bit more mundane, as you pointed out, because
like any
all
mystery
those
movie.
all those major horrific aspects of the movie have already been spoiled for you. So it might not be as interesting on rewatch. Something like Plague Dogs, I think, would undoubtedly hold up as just as emotional as it was the first time. I'm not positive how I would feel about seeing this movie another 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the nature of the kind of thing that it is. It's, you know, like going back and watching or reading The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo or something, where it can be kind of silly fun at the, you know, unraveling it at the time, but there's not much there to continually go back to. And you can only really find out, you know, by going back to it. I think I probably land maybe a little closer to Aaron than Seth, enthusiasm wise. I was reasonably involved in the mystery, and I think that the juxtaposition of using cats in this context did go reasonably far as you know, keeping me involved in things. Like, I didn't love it, but I didn't really come away disappointed or anything from it. And yeah, it's not like a poorly written movie or anything. It's just kind of slight in the end. So time will tell, I guess. But I was pleasantly surprised by, how easy I found it was to watch, to keep going and want to see what was going to happen next, even when I was starting to suspect where it was going.
Ooh, I feel cool. I liked it less than Marc.
Wow, man.
I'm no longer
Seth's
the
always the rebel.
podcast film slut. I'm hard to get.
Yeah.
Fun little bit of trivia, this movie. I haven't seen this mentioned online, but it was something I noticed when I was watching it. So there's a fight near the end of the movie between Francis and Claudantis. And when Claudantis pounces, it looked very much like a different feline from a different movie from that same year. So this movie came out in November. In June, we got The Lion King. And that scene where
weird.
Scar pounces on Simba at the end looks very similar to the shot of Claudantis.
Oh man, that's so bizarre thinking about these movies coming out in the same year.
Wow. Yeah. I would love to see the creative teams like switch on these movies and see what this Lion King version would look like. The Timon and Pumbaa sex scene.
A lot more buttholes.
Yeah. Yeah, lots of hyena buttholes.
We
I'm
gotta
more
get this
farting
Simba.
in that movie.
Simba, you gotta lose your virginity. We're gonna go out and get you a whore. I can just imagine that would be the chick.
And the Felidae hit Broadway musical, I think, would be a fun thing to see, Julie Taymor pull off too. Well, Aaron, I definitely want to thank you for coming on. This was you contributed a whole lot to this discussion, and
you did.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and it was.
I just hope I didn't interrupt. Oh crap! I'm doing it now. I'm so sorry. I'm not quite used to the whole
out.
That's it. That's it.
I don't come into your house and interrupt you on a computer internet lag.
No, you know your stuff even more than I thought you did. Yeah, impressive.
Yeah, Seth was like, "This guy's a total idiot, but we should, maybe give him a chance."
I did say.
I mean, he wasn't that wrong.
Yeah, is there anything that you want to, promote or give a shout out to while you have the ear of the nation?
Well, I have the ear of the Rhythm Nation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I guess I do. You can follow me on Instagram, and I'm now on Twitter as Dizstorian. That's D-I-S, Storian, like historian. And that Instagram is mostly where I just show off my collectibles, aka my junk that I collect. A lot of Disneyana comic books and crap like that. If you want to see me travel the country a lot, I go to a lot of cons. I go to a lot of weird off the beat places. That is on my normal Instagram. That's DizWiz1982, DIZWIZ 1982. And while you're there, check out the link to my buddy's Instagram. His name is Colin. He goes by Kiwi and Kiwi Clothing. The two of us had made several indie comics together. We call them Kiwi Comics. I do the writing. He does the drawing. And check out the link to his store on Etsy, because even if you're not interested in comic books, I promise you this guy does everything. He does sculptures, puppets, any kind of art you're interested in. I got to give a shout out to my good friend Colin while I have the time.
Hell yeah. I just followed your other account. I didn't know your other account existed.
Oh, thank you.
Everybody else.
And we'll tag those on our Instagram too, so anyone following us on there can find Aaron, and we'll link to those in the episode description.
I feel like everybody was probably very excited when you said cats, and it was not. But then they found out it was not a podcast about cats. It's about Felidae. But we should do cats someday for sure. I promise. I promise my fellow Americans.
That is definitely unwatchable.
The day the butthole cut finally comes out, that's when you got to do the podcast.
Yes. Release the butthole cut. Let's get that going on Twitter. Let's see if we can pull off a Snyder cut.
Yeah. You know,
Grassroots
they
campaign.
remade The Lion King to be more realistic. I don't think they had any butts in that.
Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.